Alyssa, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Alyssa, how do you define grief?
Grief is a natural response to loss, separation, and to change. For me, I really feel like grief is a continued expression of our love and also a continued declaration of what we long for.
Why do you think people find grief so challenging to deal with? And in fact, many people, and I can tell you a little bit about my experience with it, just try to suppress it and ignore it.
Yes, it's super uncomfortable and unpredictable. And it can make us feel out of control. It can make us feel crazy. It can hurt. And in cultures, in my world, where there's a lot of pressure around being happy and not being a burden, it can feel like it's not okay to be struggling or to be grieving in the presence of others. I think that's a big reason that grief can lead us towards isolation or lead us to doing it alone with a paid person behind closed doors, and the pressure to move on and get over it faster than is maybe healthy or necessary. So I think that's some of the struggle people have with allowing themselves and each other to be grieving.
Yeah. Do you think that the pursuit of happiness is in fact an obstacle? Because people think, if you ask them, what's the purpose of life? In my experience, most people say to just be happy, whereas perhaps that's not the right thing to strive for.
Yes, and when we make our individual happiness like an individual task of if you're not happy, you're doing something wrong. If you're not grateful and if you're not balanced in your life and you aren't navigating the waves of grief or rage or frustration well, it's because you aren't doing enough work or haven't grown enough in some way. I feel can be really, really limiting, and it can really be a force of stagnation in terms of actually allowing ourselves and each other to express and to be dynamic and to be in process, which is messy. Like the healing journey is messy. So allowing ourselves, each other to be messy as we continue on our path. And I feel there's a strong need to help us hold each other in a spacious and flexible way so we don't harden our ideas of each other as so and so showed up in great grief and they acted this way and thus they are this type of person, versus grief is moving through us or joy is moving through us and needs expression through us and is in process and progress and movement.
So much of the time, it seems like we suffer alone, and people are reluctant to even show a level of grief. And I'm not sure why, because in other cultures, and I grew up in South Africa, if a person died within the group, there was such a strong communal outpouring of grief. People would cry openly and sing, and it was shared. Whereas in our Western society, we tend to just suffer alone. What have you observed about grief in different cultures?
Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing. And I would love to hear more of what you saw as we keep going. I agree in this modern Western culture and in the world that I grew up in, I saw no expression of grief. And it did feel very private and it did feel very isolating, and it has still felt very isolating. I believe that grieving in community is a practice of belonging. And without that, we create even deeper wounds around disconnection and loneliness. And so, what you're describing, I feel, is such a core piece of wellness for the individual, but also for our communities.
Hello, it's Brad Hook here, and I'm delighted to share my new book, Start with Values. It is a guide to help you discover what matters most and then bring those core values to life through tools such as micro habits. It helps you make clearer decisions through the decision-making guide. It helps you to activate your values in conversations, particularly those courageous conversations where you need to assert yourself. And it helps you explore some potential shared values, such as nature stewardship. to help us all look after this planet that we call home. Inside, you'll find thought experiments, you'll find worksheets, you'll find action plans, and lots more. If you are interested in reducing your stress and building a life that's meaningful and purposeful, get your copy now. They're available on Amazon, both as a paperback book, such as this, and in Kindle format. So if you have some feedback, please log it in the reviews. I'd love to hear your experience of bringing your values to life. This approach has helped hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it's now ready for you. Get your copy.
And so my teachers and where I am most influenced in my work come from West Africa and the Dagara people, and specifically through Sobonfu Some, who came to the United States to help Westerners remember and learn how to grieve. And so a lot of my influence and inspiration comes from a more tribal people who were regularly coming into space of expression and grieving, and community held containers for that. If you're open to, or if you have more details about your own experience, I would love to hear more about like what people thought of grievers, how grievers were held, either like with respect and reverence, or like, oh, it's making me uncomfortable, or what kinds of expressions you saw, maybe how it was talked about, because it was very not talked about in my upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. So in South Africa, it was a very interesting place to grow up, particularly when I was a kid. We had two cultures. There was the European culture, those who had immigrated from Europe in the 1600s and beyond. And then there was the African indigenous culture. And there were several of them. But as a young person, and they were segregated, of course, under apartheid. So at that point in time, Nelson Mandela was still in prison. As a young child, you don't know any different. You're just like, oh, wow. So, Mum, why do black people live in those villages and they're not allowed to come into the cities except to work? And it's kind of like, there's this rule in South Africa. It's kind of, why does the rest of the world not talk to us? There's sanctions because of blah, blah, blah. So you don't really understand the differences, but of course you can observe it. And I would see the difference, when my grandfather died, which was a real milestone, a shock for me. He was like my father. No one said anything. I mean, there was like, there's going to be a funeral and everyone's just like dour and okay, let's just grit through this. It was really confusing. And probably because it wasn't processed as a child, it probably still hasn't been to some degree. Well, I think it has. But then I would see black people, when someone in their community passed away, would spend weeks just away and together, and they would all mourn together, and you would see these ceremonies, and there was ululating and crying and loads of expression. So the emotions were completely shared. Mm-hmm. And so at first hand, I could see the difference, and it just seemed so much more connected the way that they were doing it. Whereas we were all, British style, let's not discuss it. Something's happened. It's not good. Stiff upper lip, pull yourself together. And it didn't seem as connected. And it really started challenging my thinking around, well, there must be other ways of expressing not just that, but also joy. Because in the African culture, people would get together and just instantly someone would play a drum and everyone starts dancing and singing. So the emotions were really a group thing, not an individual thing.
Yes. Oh, thank you for sharing more. Yeah, I really feel I do a lot of work with people one-to-one, but I think there's a unique medicine available only in community spaces where we're holding and creating a container together that allows a different level of expression, but it also allows this relationship of being a part of a village. And we can be a part of the village, and we can be completely breaking down and deep in grief and needing help, and still be a part of the village. We can need so much and be grieving, and then we can return to the village, and then we find in ourselves like, oh wait, actually now I can hold space for someone else who's grieving. And we play this back and forth role instead of like, I'm the therapist and you're the client, and we always only engage in that way. Which we do a lot of in Western culture. And I love therapy. I love counseling. I love coaching. All of those things I am for. But I'm curious how we can create more village in our lives where we're kind of role taking both we're in both places. Sometimes we're the student, sometimes we're the teacher, sometimes we need help and support. Sometimes we can give that help and support. And with grief, often grief is associated with a break in connection. And so when we can come into a space of deep connection, I find only there can we offer, like only there can we kind of tap into a deeper, it's not even tap into, but only there can we touch some of our deeper wounds of disconnection. From this place of connection in community, in village, often like more can be surfaced versus this place of isolation that I feel alone and I'm grieving a break in disconnection, and it's really hard to navigate and to move with and to integrate that when we are still feeling isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's this other side of grief, which is when someone is obviously dying, they're in their last weeks, months, and some people pull away because it's making them feel a sense of, looming loss. How can we deal better with that phase? Because it is a natural part of life and it's not something to avoid. And in fact, I don't think it helps the other person when suddenly all of their friends and family pull back.
I'm so glad you speak to this, Brad, because that's exactly what really spiked my interest. I was doing hospice work, and then I was also at the bedside with my grandmother and another beloved's grandmother through their dying stages. And though they were women in very similar socioeconomic groups and certain dynamics, the way that the family supported them and their care teams supported them was completely different. And it really brought to light, like the in that case, the patient's care or the person's care and quality of connection and capacity to feel belonging is so dependent on the people around them and their relationship with death or grief, and the ability to lean in and be present for it, or to lean out and feel uncomfortable and distance. And that was so kind of alarming for me, of like, oh my gosh, we're so bad at this. And we hurt each other a lot when a beloved is dying or grieving, and we don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. We hurt each other a lot in these spaces where we really need connection and support. So to help come back to your question.
Hey, Brad here. Would you believe that around 70% of the people who watch this podcast have not yet subscribed? It would mean the world to us if you click that subscribe button on whichever platform you use, so that we can stay connected with you and you'll receive notifications when we add new episodes. We really appreciate you coming and connecting with us and being part of our community. So all the best.
Some of the ways I think that we can support ourselves and each other around this is to, first of all, say, to be really honest and say, hey, I noticed that I'm filled with some anxiety because I don't know what to say, but I want you to know I'm here for you, whether that is in silence or whether that is just to listen or to hold hands or to go on a walk with you or to tell you stories about your person that I remember or to ask you about them. Like, I'm here for you. I don't know what that looks like or what's best in that, but I want you to know. So that's one way. Another way, I work a lot in the community grief rituals as a space for moving grief together, but also as a practice space for us to learn and take back to our own relationships and communities. And one thing we do in those grief circles are triads, where we're in a group of 3 and each person has a full 10 minutes to share about what's on their heart. It's not a prepared sharing. It's just what's actually here for me. And you have 2 people only listening, never responding. They are never going to actually respond to you. You just have the full 10 minutes to express, notice out loud, have witnesses. And at that 10-minute mark, we would then switch to a different speaker. And that, something I've learned is that the people listening are like, it is such a gift to be off the hook to try to fix it or make them feel better, to be able to know that my job here is just presence, which is a huge job. But my presence is the medicine. It is what I'm doing. And that's enough. Allows a connection that is different than when we're trying to make them feel better or anything like that. And so from these triads, inviting us all to go back into our worlds, and when we notice grief or rage or frustration or whatever it might be up, that we might reach out to one person or two, but starting with one person, right? And say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? I just need presence. I don't want you to say anything, but to just sit with me while I share what's happening for me. Do you have capacity for that? Set a timer, create a really precise container to allow some of this deeper movement of feelings.
Yes. And don't try and problem solve as I'm speaking.
Yes, absolutely. And trust that I can handle the big emotions I'm experiencing and that I will ask for support if I need it. And so it's a lot of practicing that. Do I trust myself to ask for support and to say, hey, no, I don't, I need space from that. And so a lot of my work too is how do we build trust with ourselves? How do we grow ourselves into the best caretakers of our own hearts and sense when it's safe to share deeper or when, I'm not going to go that deep with this person or in this container. So much of okay, how do we tend to our hearts?
So you've spent a lot of time with people in those final stages of life. How are they feeling in those moments? Are they feeling grief about the impermanence of life, or are they usually accepting, or is it different?
Definitely very different. I have been with people who are like, I am not ready to go. I don't want to lay down in this hospital bed because I'll die here. I don't want to die here. And other people who are like, when it's my time, it's my time. And I can't say that it is based on one thing. I think that the more we practice in our lives, our own tolerance, growing our tolerance for uncertainty and for not being in control and for kind of trusting and surrendering, that can support us in aging and in dying. But it's not to say that that's the only thing. A lot of the times there's things that really don't feel fair, and it can be so hard to wrestle with why me? Why this timing? Why this? So that question of why can be really challenging. So allowing ourselves to have this question of why, and also be growing our acceptance of this is my path and I'm here. And so there's a lot of different ways. I've also been with a lot of people who are choosing the time of their death. In Oregon, we have the law medical aid in dying. So if there's a terminal diagnosis and many other things that have to line up for someone to be qualified, then they can take a medication that ends their life. And so when I'm with those families, the people and the families can be so at peace. It's not a frivolous thing. It is something they have deeply considered and thought about and talked to doctors about and hopefully been able to talk to families about. Not always do they have family support, but when the families do support, it can be the most beautiful leaving of this realm, of this body, the most connected, the most supportive, when they can be gathered together in choice around this. And I think it's really beautiful to have that choice. And in many places, we don't have that choice, which does require a lot more letting go, a lot more I am here for the ride, the undoing of the human. We watch little kids grow into humans and we're putting blocks and growth and we celebrate that. But in our culture, we're so focused on ascent that we don't really honor the descent and the deconstruction of the person and the needing to rest back into receiving help and support. And in a world where we've woven together independence with integrity, it makes it so much harder.
Well, that's the other thing you notice in other cultures is that old people are revered. They're really important and they stay part of the family. They're never shipped off to a retirement home or something like that. They're there and they continue to contribute as much as they can. They'll often be cooking, they'll be in the kitchen, they'll be looking after the little kids. Whereas we kind of at a certain point say, all right, well, you're past your use by date, so go and hang out with all of the other old people and we'll see you every second weekend or something like that, if you're lucky.
Absolutely. And that reminds me so much of maybe 5 years ago, I read an article about old growth trees. And when an old growth tree or an ancient tree was cut down, the stump continues to feed the forest. And so I've thought about that a lot, like in the room when a death has occurred, not rushing to have the body removed, but like we're still in relationship and can be in relationship for a long time. And that's with death, but also with our elders, even if they're not able to do any of those ways we think of helping, they're still feeding the system. And many cultures believe even after death, we're still community. The form of our relationship and communication has changed. The way I say I love you, the way I connect with you has a different form, but they're still in our community. And I feel that's super important. I feel that to be really true, but I also feel like we're missing examples of that. I'm not seeing people with an ancestor altar in their home and their relationship with that, right? We are from other cultures, definitely Celtic practice and holiday of Samhain and Dia de los Muertos, like are times where we're honoring and inviting our ancestors back home and we're connecting with them in a really intentional way. But there's so many ways we can do that in our day to day and in the times between the end of October, this time frame of both Samhain and Dia de los Muertos, that can also, I think, really help our elders have less anxiety and fear about being forgotten, as well as help us stay in relationship with our ancestors.
Do people in those final stages crave connection, and would they benefit from having someone there to listen to the stories of their life? Because I often think, why wouldn't we all just make an effort from time to time to go and connect with someone who's, in their 80s or 90s and just listen to the stories?
Absolutely. It's so different for different people. I think there's a big cultural pressure, again, for people to not be a burden. So that's one of the biggest things I hear as a death doula of like, with aging parents and things, they don't want to be a burden to their kids. And so that is such a block. Because we're thinking about being a burden as like financial and being retired or drawing from the system instead of bringing money and resourcing into the system, it's hard for many people to get to shift that perspective of like, this is actually this is a time where I am now drawing from the system financially or in material resources, but my relationship and what I'm doing is different. The quality of my presence, the storytelling and retelling. I think telling and retelling our story is really important throughout our lives, and especially at the end of our lives, and making those connections as we approach the end of our lives. Sometimes people are very present and awake, in the time leading up to death, and sometimes it could be a really long time where they're not as communicative and but presence. When I first did my hospice training, the thing I walked away with was this idea and this mantra of you are the medicine. There's nothing you can do to fix it. There's nothing you can do to help or change. Really, like what you're doing is presence, your quality of presence. And I think that's so important, both at the end of life, but also with grievers, with our friends and families and clients who are grieving. Quality of presence is the medicine.
Yes, I like that. And I think that applies to all aspects of life. It's how present can you be to this moment? And that changes everything because you're creating the future and the past right here. I'd love to hear about other forms of grief that you work with.
Yes. When I think of grief, I find that grief is connected to pretty much all change. And I work with a lot of people who might come in because their mom died or someone told them to see a grief counselor. But actually, when we go into it, there's all of these threads that are all these other threads that we wouldn't necessarily name or associate with grief. There's a lot of anxiety, depression, and addiction that are connected to untended grief that I've noticed in my practice. And so when it comes to grief, the framework that I use comes from a man named Francis Weller, who speaks about the 5 gates of grief. And if this is new to you, welcome. This is something that really expanded my understanding of grief. And if you know these gates well, then I would invite listeners to listen for something new. For me, I always hear something new when I hear them described by other voices and people. So these 5 gates of grief, the first gate is everything we love, we will lose. So, or we will be separated from, or it will change form. And I found this through Buddhism much before I found the gates of grief, and just this reality that everything is changing and dynamic. Even if I'm in a partnership until we die, that partnership is going to change forms many times. When there is a physical death, now the relationship is changing form dramatically, right? And so how we say I love you and I miss you, all of it's changing. A man named Stephen Jenkinson, who I also consider a teacher, he has a quote that I love, which is, to grieve is to love something that has gone out of sight. To love is to grieve something that has not yet done so. And to me, that is really key in this first gate. How do I love knowing that I'm going to be separated from this or it's going to change? So that's a big one. Then there's also, the second gate is the parts of me that have not known love, which is a huge one with shame. Like shame shows up here, so much shame and judgment, especially self-criticism, self-judgment of, I don't want these parts of me to be known because I'll be shunned, I'll be kicked out of the village, I won't be able to have my needs met or connection, right? So where have I fractured myself and judged and pushed aside? The third gate is the collective sorrows of the world. How do I be aware of what's happening in the world and have space and allow my own heart to break with what's happening globally? Well, I also need to maintain my life and my connections and tend to my personal individual grief. The fourth one, and this is the one that shows up the most in my practice and in my life, is what I expected and did not receive. Grief connected to these expectations that we maybe didn't even know we had. And often we maybe did know we had. I thought my job working at the dream company would make me feel this. I thought being married would feel like this. I thought my family would look like, And so we're grieving the loss of this dream, of this idea of ourselves and our lives. And that is so present for many of us. And that fifth gate is ancestral grief. So the grief that we come here with, whether we can name it, we know the players, the characters and their names or not, we all walk with and come with a legacy. So those are 5 gates that have really helped me look more widely and hold more widely this space of grief.
Very interesting, fantastic framework. What attracted you to this type of work?
Yeah, I was always interested in working with humans and the body, but I had a really windy way kind of back to it. When I found my way back to it, I had been spending a lot of time with these 2 grandmothers in the end of their lives, and being present with them and being present with their family members. My dad's a doctor, so I remember being in the hospital with one of them and being like, Dad, why are doctors so bad at this part? Like, why is this happening? And he and I started a book club. We started going down a book club, reading Being Mortal, and starting to like look at the medicalization of death. And for me, that's really where I saw how the individual was impacted by their community, the community supporting them. And I was like, what's happening? And then I was volunteering with hospice and volunteering with medical aid and dying and going back to school for hospice massage. So it was at the bedside, like hands-on energy work and body work at the bedside. And that was very, very beautiful. And I loved that work, but I was still I still had a craving to support the people beyond the death. So approaching death, but then how to continue that support beyond. And so I was starting to work with families where I would come in when their person was on hospice, and then I would continue grief work with the people that I'd already built a relationship with and continue care with them beyond the physical death. But as I kept moving into understanding grief, it just kept asking for more support around, or when I was starting to do more work around death. I'm going to stop and start that sentence over. As I was doing more work with death, I was becoming so much more aware of the untended grief we were all walking with and not speaking to. And that was really illuminating. Actually, when COVID happened, my career really ended because I couldn't go be with dying people anymore. And so I started to feel like, I need other people in the space with me. I'm grieving, and I just need to be in space with other people. And so in 2020, I started to host online death salons, which started to be a space to come together to bring in art and music and creativity and poetry and space to be together with mortality and grief. And so that began to happen every month online. And then as things started to open up, I started hosting in-person grief rituals in Portland, Oregon, and more also online, but a lot more in person, and then started to host these grief rituals that are more like day-longs or weekend retreats that give us more space to create a deeper container so we can feel and express and like come into contact in a more intimate way with what we can't touch in our day-to-day life because of all the busyness and like small talk conversation and logistics that have to happen.
Yeah, amazing. What a journey. And I'm sure it has helped many, many people to just, come to terms with the fact that this is a natural part of life and that it's not something to resist or, pretend that didn't happen, which we definitely see a lot. On the flip side, how can we be more conscious about aging?
Yes. Oh my gosh, with aging and with approaching, these milestones that happen in our growth and our maturing, it can be really important to actually mark some mark posts, or to notice the mark posts and create practices or rituals. By which I really just mean making something that's invisible visible, making something tangible that might feel intangible, and saying, hey, I'm really noticing this shift in my mom or my dad, and the fact that I called and they didn't know my name today. Mm-hmm. Or this shift in my own body as a condition changes, right? And just slowing down to notice and to feel what's associated with that. A lot of my work, so as it relates to aging, but also other forms of grief, I do a lot of work with people around ritual or practices. How do we create rituals in our lives that help hold the extremes of the joy and the gratitude and the grief and fear and loss, right? So as we age, as we're like, thinking anticipatorily for aging and dying, some of why that's scary and some of why that's sad is because of what we love about life. It's because of what we love about our relationships. So how can I create intentional spaces or practices where I engage fully in the sensory experience of being human, engage fully in a meal I love or the person I'm grieving, loved, engage deeply in dance or movement, something that I get to enjoy having a human body, right? So again, when it comes to aging, how can I make intentional spaces where I get to engage and the whole intention is play or joy or experiencing like the physicality of my body, going on a hike that I won't be able to go on in the future. And allowing ourselves to hold the tension of that, most people avoid because that's so uncomfortable. But if we bring in the impermanence of it, it can enhance our, again, presence and thus enjoyment and gratitude for what we have.
Absolutely. I was speaking to an author recently who said that through his book called The Expectation Effect. If you believe aging is good for you, it is, and you live 7 years longer on average. If you believe it's bad for you, it's bad for you. So why not just adopt that mindset of, this is great, I'm learning, I'm wise, I'm on that path, rather than, people start pretending, oh, I'm having my 20th birthday again, or, stop celebrating their birthday at some point. We should just enjoy the journey, right?
Enjoy the journey. And like, what an honor to get the privilege of becoming an elder. What does it mean if we start to approach this in our younger years of like, I'm walking towards eldership? What does that mean? What does it mean to be like, many other cultures revere their elders? What does it mean? Like, should I be walking into a space where there is something for people to learn, or to just for us to connect in a new way? Like, what could that look like and be like? What does it mean for me to become an elder? So I agree with you of like, we get this opportunity to be embodied. We get this opportunity, hopefully, with each day. What can I experience, feel? How can I drop in and enjoy this moment? And that's not to bypass all of the hard feelings and emotions and realities at all. When I think about some of the like horrifying war and destruction in the world, when I think about why it's so sad, it's because of like the loss of human life and the loss of cultures and the loss of language. And if I'm only making space to just be in the heartache and the grief of that, which we have to make space to feel, and I'm not also then celebrating where there is culture thriving, or how can I bring culture and music and language and arts and these things that I'm grieving over here and that I love to life, then we can be out of balance. So just making sure that we can tend to both.
So grief can be a driver of wellness and creativity and even resilience.
I believe it is a key ingredient, and without it, I feel part of our epidemic of loneliness is the result of not having intentional community spaces for grieving. I believe that grieving together does exactly that. It creates community resilience where societal transformation is possible and where we trust each other and we can create a more beautiful world.
So if someone is out there, and this takes me back to Alan Watts used to say in one of his talks, he talked about celebrating death. We should have centers for the dying where it's a fantastic place to go and we celebrate and say, wow, you're about to leave us, but wasn't it great to have you there? I mean, what a different way of even trying to perceive this whole experience.
The clients that I work with and family members who are approaching, aging, would be like, I don't want anything. I don't want to party. I don't want to be noticed. I don't want to like. So I would say yes to the big party for those who are into that. And then alternatively, I think it's the small daily or weekly ritual of like, wow, my life is finite. What's one thing I'm going to be really intentional in enjoying this week or today, or with this relationship that's important? Or say, hey, a person I love is dying. What is one way I'm going to connect with them? Or what's one question I'm going to ask, or one story I want to really hear from them this week? So starting like really the invitation to go small and focused as much as we can weave it into busy lives, right? Where we can start to really intentionally enjoy and celebrate and connect as we go.
Do you think there is an age that you can start talking about this with kids? And in traditional or cultures, death is a part of life, and you see it firsthand, whether it's with animals or with elders or whoever, other people in the tribe. Someone gets injured and dies. Whereas now we try and shield children from the fact that death is a part of life, and I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do.
I agree. And I currently have a 15-month-old daughter, and she's been coming with me since she was 7 weeks old to grief circles. And just it's both the result of me feeling very passionately about her being a part of the village and us being a part of the village, but it's also met equally by a village that is open and inviting to kids and parents with kids. And I feel lucky in Portland, Oregon, and in my community where I am reaching out and saying, hey, can we come together? And there is positive feedback, and people are always so grateful that she's there. It's been really beautiful for me to experience her just sleeping through the wailing and the grieving and the raging and the drumming and the singing and the dancing. She just sleeps, and she can sometimes look up and be like, wow, there's big stuff happening and feelings here, and I'm safe. And it is safe, and adults expressing at this level is safe. And so I really feel that we need kids there. I feel like kids do have an insight that is really unique for us adults that we can all learn from as well. And figuring out how they can be a part of the community, and also having some kid appropriate spaces for sure that help the conversation and the activities be oriented towards where they're at, but also having some exposure to adults having big expressions that are safe and not out of control. I think though it can feel out of control, though in the container of a community, it can really help ground it. So I think it's really important. I don't have a specific age, but I think as much as we can weave kids and parents into the mix, the better.
Because a lot of the time we shield them from that, pretend it doesn't exist, and then we see this anxiety epidemic amongst young people, and we worry, oh, if we talk about the impermanence of life, it's going to increase that. But I actually think it will increase their presence and gratitude for the experience. I would have appreciated that as a child, I think.
Absolutely. I think so too. And being aware of like, this is a thing I love, and it's not a given that it's going to be here forever, also helps inspire passion and purpose. That means I need to protect it. That means I need to engage with it. That means I want to get into the forest because I love this type of tree. I need to go see this type of tree.
Yes.
I'm not guaranteed to always have access to this. There's logging. There's other things that it's important that we don't overwhelm them and create despair and hopelessness and like there's nothing I can do, but that we instill and support passion and purpose and love and value and meaning so that they might take actions towards those things.
So I'm sure there are many people out there listening who haven't fully come to terms with the loss of a loved one. They've repressed the emotions, or they've just avoided thinking about it. What are some tips in terms of, you mentioned creating a small altar, and you see these when I spent a lot of time in India. Every home has got a little sacred area with some photographs, and in places like Bali, they put, incense and gifts for the gods, and they really do think about those who have passed. What are your tips for building some remembrance rituals or something else like that?
Great question. You can start really, really small, right? And you can scale it as big or small as we want. But starting small, that I'm again thinking about the senses, right? So, I mean, it could be creating a physical space in your home, whether it's a table or a windowsill, where we put pictures of our beloved ancestors. Or sometimes it's pictures, sometimes it's things that they love, like a cup of coffee. My grandma loved to drink coffee, and so I pour her some coffee in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee. It could be something like that in a physical place, or you could offer coffee to the ground outside in your garden while you're drinking your coffee, things like that. So food, it could be, I'm going to make this dish from my lineage, or that so-and-so used to love, or that I'm going to really miss enjoying when I don't have a body to enjoy it with, right? And like really slow down and savor this. It could be sound or music, connecting with music that they loved, or is again from our tradition, or connects us in some way. I personally like having a physical space with photos, and I will often go and light a candle and sit there. And sitting there may include meditation. It may include journaling. It may include art. Having ways for like reflective, quiet space, but also expressive space, whether it's art, writing, speaking to your person, lots of different ways to just like begin a little bit, and then slightly bigger ways like anniversaries, right? Or the day, once a month, I do something to connect with my ancestors or connect with my own anxiety around my physical death and the aging of my body, or connect around make space to grieve for in my case, like the woman who dreamt about her family looking one way and having that dream dismantled and fall apart, like can I make space to care for myself or for my community or friends and beloveds to help us just keep tending this grief and tending the relationship and the love and the longing that is also there.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Alyssa, thank you so much. How can people connect with you? Where would you like them to go if they'd like to follow your work?
Yes, my website is alyssarosehealingarts.com. I have a newsletter, so definitely sign up for the newsletter. That's where I share all of the updates on gatherings, online and in-person gatherings. I also do consultations, like a free consultation up front. So if you're like, I don't know where to start, book a 30-minute session with me and we can talk about your specific situation. There are some in-person grief rituals coming up this year and beyond. There's also virtual spaces. I also post a lot on Instagram. The Instagram is Alyssa Rose Healing. So all of those places are great ways to get in touch.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts for those who are still with us?
I just encourage us all to have a lot of grace with ourselves and with each other, and to see how we can make space for whatever it is that is moving through us, whatever the big emotion, whether it's joy or grief, and inviting us to just slow down, to let ourselves feel through it completely. Even if you're overwhelmed at the grocery store or in a meeting and you can't do it right then, if you can slow down and say, hey, I'm going to come back to you. I feel you. I hear you. I'm going to come back. And then make spaces in our lives to actually come back and to just remember we are the best caretakers of our own hearts. So like, that's a big role, right? Like, how can we really tend to our hearts and let our loved ones know how to be with us? And just remember that grieving is a natural response. It's super healthy. It looks a million different ways. It's going to be uncomfortable and unpredictable. It's normal. All of that's normal. There's no going backwards. It's all going forwards. It's just uncomfortable. So just reminding us that it's natural. You're doing it right. Ask for connection and support and grace.
Alyssa, thank you so much. I have really enjoyed the conversation, and everyone, please do go and check out those links. They're all in the show notes as well. Alyssa, thank you.
Thank you so much.